is Sara Morano, and today I'm teaming up with the Confraternity of Pilgrims to Rome to bring you a special video on a much discussed topic, which is it safe to walk the Via Francigena alone as a woman? And I walked the Via Francigena solo in 2018, starting in Canterbury and ending in Rome. Which you can check a few clips out of on my channel. I'll link it below, and I'll be drawing from that experience to explain what I did to stay safe, as well as the joys and challenges of going it solo. Before I get started, I just want to offer a quick disclaimer that everything I say is related to my own experience. I really deeply believe that a pilgrimage is a personal journey on every single level, so you need to think about what your needs and goals are and decide for yourself how and why you're doing it. If you want to walk solo, if it's something you feel comfortable with. I'm not really advocating for you to do exactly what I did, but I do want to offer my experience kind of into the pantheon of pilgrimage stories, because I think we spend a lot of time talking and thinking about what could go wrong, and so I also wanted to give my experiences and just let you guys know what can go right when you're walking alone as a woman. So without anything more to say, let's get into the actual walk. Let's talk about Canterbury. That's where I started, and that's where the most important thing I used on my whole entire journey started, and that is confidence. Even to get to the starting point and to sustain you all the way to Rome, the most important thing for a solo female walker, for any walker, is confidence. You want to have in your reserve of experiences, other successes that build your ability to think on your feet and test you. Walking a previous Camino like the Camino de Santiago is a great experience to have before you start, but it isn't the only prerequisite. I actually never walked a pilgrimage before I walked the Via Francigena, but I was comfortable with the idea of traveling solo and the endurance portion because I had run ultra marathons, including the Comrades in South Africa the year before. So that gave me so much confidence to start, and I really trusted myself, which was something I used all throughout my trip. And if you don't feel super confident now, the good thing is that confidence is not a personality trait. It's something you can build, and just the natural product of setting and meeting new challenges for yourself. So even though the Via Francigena is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, maybe, that requires a lot of planning, before that you can find ways to build confidence in your everyday life by training, trying new things, and pushing the envelope. And that will do a really good job of preparing you to walk the Francigena, which is more important than any special hiking gear or guidebook or YouTube video or piece of advice I can give. So number one, start off with confidence. Which I'm going to anchor to Calais, which is the starting point in France, and also for me was the second day. The first day of my Francigena, I walked like 22 miles from Canterbury to Dover, and then I took the ferry from Dover to Calais. And really, I want to talk about making your own rules at this point, because once I got to the ferry dock in Calais, I took a taxi to an Airbnb I had booked, and that was a decision I made. That was a bit hard for me because I had a marathon background, so when I originally heard about the Francigena, I thought it was the same rules. It's something you walk or run every step. I originally was thinking that I would run every step. I wore trail running shoes the whole time, but I quickly had to adapt because the size of my pack and the things that I needed was just too heavy for me to run with at that time. So I gave that up and I still decided to walk, and I had maybe a sense of orthodoxy that I should walk every step, but when I was planning it out, I knew that I felt comfortable the first night, like booking something ahead of time in Calais, because I had researched the city a little bit, because I had other experiences, good experiences traveling and staying in Airbnbs. That is how I wanted to do it, and that meant taking a taxi because I had walked 22 miles that day already. I couldn't really walk 5 miles at night to my accommodation, so I made that rule for myself that I could sometimes take cars to get to my accommodations. And throughout the rest of the trip, I learned how to book in a different way for walking. That was going to allow me to stay closer to the path and not make that necessary. But I think it was really important that I did that because it sort of set the tone that this is my pilgrimage. Like, I can make my own rules. Like, I'm going to make rules that let me have a good experience and stay doing things that I feel like are safe and that I feel comfortable with. So that sort of evolved into this habit I had when I was walking to start early enough and plan the mileage to arrive in the town where I was staying for the night, or at around 5 p.m. And just sort of a pro tip, 5 p.m. is when the tourist office in France close. And so the French portion of the Via Francigena is really notable for having less choices in accommodation, especially pilgrim accommodation. A lot of people have a very hard time with that. And one thing that was extremely helpful was utilizing these tourist office that are in really every stopping point on like the traditional Via Francigena. And why it's helpful to book through these offices is because they have lists of special pilgrim accommodations that aren't so easy to find before you go. I've published actually all of the places I stayed on my website, so that's a good current list as of 2018. But the tourist office were really a great source of this information that I didn't have otherwise on my trip, and they also were bilingual, and it was easy for me to communicate with them face to face, and then for them to call and book places in France, where a lot of times the accommodation hosts were only French speakers, and I am American and I speak American English, and at the beginning of the trip my French was a bit harder for everyone to understand, so that was extremely helpful. And beyond that, just sort of like keeping myself out of the situation by ending at 5 p.m. every day, like in these tourist office, and kind of reliably finding a place to stay. I kept myself out of the situation where I was like wandering around in the dark, really tired at the end of the day, and looking for a place to stay. I did meet people who like had sleeping bags and tents, and they would walk really long days, sometimes like into the night, and they managed it totally differently. But from my experiences, this was kind of like my rules, like my playbook. I didn't walk in the dark, and I mean, I did like at night after I dropped off my stuff, and I would go and like get dinner, ice cream or something. Especially like there are some really nice bigger cities on the trail, but in terms of like navigating, I didn't like navigate in the dark because of like cars and roads and traffic and like visibility for them. And like also I used a lot of like signs, like trail markers and things that I wouldn't be able to see during the dark. So that is a rule that I made for myself. And throughout the pilgrimage, I kind of learned that there's no set of rules. You have to make your own rules with what you feel comfortable with, what you want to achieve. And yeah, and that's the most important thing. So the third thing I want to talk about, which happened all the way from Pas de Calais to Tuscany, is making friends. And that was kind of like a core part of my safety strategy. Sometimes I feel like even the claim I walked the Via Francigena alone is a misnomer, because even though I set off from Canterbury Cathedral, just me and my backpack, along the way I met so many wonderful people who I would also walk with. So this not only made the trip so cool, it was a kind of self-defense mechanism. Because even though I was walking alone, who really would be able to tell when I could surround myself with really great people? When I found other pilgrims to share the road with, I usually did, because who is going to guide you better than a local? And what's a better souvenir to return home with than friends from England, France, Switzerland, and Italy? And in the occasional event where I did feel threatened by a situation, maybe being alone in the woods with kind of one shadowy figure, or someone yelling something out of their car to me, which thankfully only happened once. But in those situations, I would kind of look around and see if maybe there was some friendly face, like a couple out for a walk on a Sunday, or maybe another pilgrim, maybe someone walking their dog that I could talk to ask how to get into the next town, like 4 directions. And more often than not, I ended up having really great conversations with people, and they were more than happy to help me with my trip once I like told them what I was doing. It was a really cool way to incorporate other people into my journey, even though I was walking alone. And I think the barrier to this almost is that independence streak where you don't want to ask people for help, or maybe there's some resistance to asking for directions, to sort of leaning on other people. But one thing that I would say to someone in that position, like I was to really realize that when you're a pilgrim, you might be a foreign person in a foreign land, but you're sharing your adventure with other people. So it's always a really great way to build friendships. And yeah, it's a really great opportunity to make friends that'll help you stay safe and just have an overall really enjoyable experience. And my third and final piece of advice is to take the road more traveled sometimes. So as you study the Via Francigena, it will become apparent that there's no one path. In a few spots, the ancient route differs then from what is today the official route, and vice versa, like detouring to the beach at Ouessant or taking a boat across Lac Leman versus walking along the edge of the lake. I would walk along the edge of the lake because it's lovely, but that's a separate conversation. When I walked the Via Francigena, I realized there were so many points where you could make your own decision about the actual path you were taking. And so when I got lost or unsafe, I was always really fast to switch gears. And I did travel with a phone with GPS. I didn't have cell service, but the GPS still worked in my phone. So I always had a map and a point on it that showed me where I was. So this made it easy to reroute. Sometimes I would plan on taking like a wooded path, which I actually did outside of Chalons-en-Champagne, but then I switched directions because I was really the only person in the woods. It seemed like there were people kind of like, just hanging out in the woods, and kind of a sense where I just got a weird feeling. So in that particular instance, I used the GPS on my phone to figure out the alternative route, which would be walking on a road, which isn't as nice. But just the fact that there are like cars and traffic, it kind of made me feel more comfortable than being hidden in the woods, where people were, maybe doing like different activities. I didn't want to be by myself that day, and that is perfectly fine. You're going to have a lot of opportunities to kind of like choose your own course, like in a physical sense, with the roads and trails that you're walking. So definitely take advantage of that to make the path the one that feels best to you. And sometimes that will mean taking the road more traveled. So that is all I have to share for today. In review, the 4 pieces of advice I am offering to you for solo walking the Via Francigena are: start off with confidence, make your own rules, make friends, and take the road more traveled sometimes. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you like it, be sure to follow my channel and the Confraternity of Pilgrims to Rome, and let me know if you have more questions about the Via Francigena, because I'm always happy to talk about my experiences.